welcome back. I'm your White Mage, and today we have an exploration of some cards. Square recently announced that Opus 12 would have characters from the Final Fantasy Explorers title. The Opus series has never seen any Category Explorers cards, but the Chapter series did. Most of the cards were standard units, there was a couple cards with names, and some summons. And there was a couple promos. The first cards to be printed from the title Explorers was in the 14th set, towards the end of the game's life cycle. Final Fantasy Explorers released in Japan December 2014. Chapter 14 was also released in December of the same year. It's pretty easy to understand why this decision was made. If it seems like a coincidence, you can see this again with Opus 11, the Opus 11 starter decks, and the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Yet, unless Square is going to announce a sequel or a Switch port to Final Fantasy Explorers, this new title announcement feels rather out of place. But I wanted to look at three cards in particular from the Chapter series. Cloud, Squall, Titus. They all have the same cost, the same stat line, and they have a very interesting alternate cost. They read, reveal this card in your hand, put a standard unit of the same element in the break zone, put this card on the field, play this card to the field. You can only use this effect on your turn. So these cards had like a back attack, like a pseudo back attack that could only be used on your turn. And the economics of it were better. If you played a 2 CP forward, it costs less than to pay 5 CP. At 3 CP, it evens out if you were to play it as opposed to discarding it for the CP. And additionally, you could use the effect of a 3 CP forward and then sacrifice it to play the cost, to pay for the cost. The first card I wanted to talk about was Cloud. Cloud can be a real bomb. In addition to his summon effect, he has a enter the battlefield effect. When he enters the field, he deals 4,000 points of damage to all forwards your opponent controls, and he breaks all monsters your opponent controls. This is obviously a very strong effect. A single effect, you destroy all your opponent's monsters, and you splash a reasonable amount of damage on a single discounted card. In the current Opus meta, we see Fina played, which deals 5k to the board for 6 CP and a 9k body, which is a slightly more powerful effect, but she also costs slightly more. Lastly, Cloud has an action ability. You pay 2 fire, 1 colorless, and dull, he will return to your hand. So this effect can be used continuously over and over again. The next card I want to talk about is Squall. When Squall enters a field, your opponent chooses an element. Then they dull and freeze all characters they control not of that element. It can be a bit confusing at first, but this card can be very impactful against multicolored decks, and is basically useless against monocolored decks. Against a 2-colored deck, they will most likely dull and freeze probably a little bit less than half of the cards they control. If they're playing against a 3-color deck, they'll most likely dull and freeze over half of the cards they control. There aren't many cards that we could compare this to in Opus. The effect is very strong, but it's also quite unique. I would love to see something like this in Opus. In an Ice Wind deck, you could play this and then dull freeze one or two of their elements, and then use cards like Miyun and Chocobo to return Squall to your hand and keep doing it, effectively cutting them off of an entire color. Lastly, he has an action ability. For 1 ICP, he gains first strike until the end of the turn. The last card I want to talk about is Titus. Titus might be the least interesting card. But that's because he's just a little bit more straightforward. When he enters the field, he reduces the power of a forward by 6k. He can kill small things, and he can force unfair trade with big things. The card is reasonably compared to Opus 9 Kane. Both sacrifice a card to play, albeit Opus 9 Kane you still have to pay 3 CP, maybe 4 CP, depending on if you use the effect. Titus is simply one and done. Titus also has a field ability. The field ability grants him Brave and the ability to attack twice if the controller has more damage than his opponent. This is reminiscent of Blitzace Titus, who can attack multiple times, which scales to how much damage you have taken and gains Brave. So what's the point? For starters, I think these share a really cool effect. The pseudo back attack and the alternate cost. The auto effects might be a bit too strong, break all your opponent's forwards or prevent them from developing a color, but not the summoning conditions. Square definitely has a favoritism for certain cards that they want to see being played, and these characters just seem to be in the right place to be printed. So if you'd like to see more comparisons of chapter cards, please let me know in the comments below. I've been your White Mage, thank you very much, and I hope you have a wonderful day.